In 1899, a British colonel named Robert Baden-Powell stood on the walls of a tiny South African town called Mafeking. Behind him, barely 1,500 soldiers, most of them untrained volunteers who had never fired a rifle in combat. In front of him, 8,000 battle-hardened Boer fighters with heavy artillery, cavalry, and orders to crush the town before breakfast. Baden-Powell had no reinforcements coming, no heavy guns, no modern weapons worth mentioning. What he did have was a biscuit tin, an acetylene lamp, and one of the most audacious ideas in military history. Over the next 217 days, he would hold off that entire army, not by fighting them, but by tricking them. Fake minefields that were just buried boxes of sand, barbed wire that didn't exist, a searchlight made from kitchen scraps, and soldiers ordered to carefully step over invisible obstacles, just in case enemy spies were watching. It worked. And the crazy thing is, Mafeking isn't even the most extreme example. Throughout history, commanders have won battles, sieges, and even entire wars using nothing but pure deception. No bullets, no bombs, just psychology. Today we're going to break down 3 of the greatest military deceptions ever pulled off. Tricks so outrageous they sound like they belong in a movie, not a history book. And one of them changed the entire outcome of World War II. Let's go back to that South African town in October 1899. The Second Boer War had just erupted, and Colonel Robert Baden-Powell, yes, the same man who would later found the Boy Scouts, had been sent to the border town of Mafeking with a simple job: raise some troops and cause problems for the Boers. There was one issue: his army was a disaster. Many of his recruits had never even ridden a horse. Some had never held a weapon, and Mafeking itself was wide open, sitting on flat ground with a 6-mile perimeter that would need thousands of soldiers to properly defend. When General Piet Cronje arrived with 8,000 Boer fighters and surrounded the town, most military observers expected it to fall within days. The Boers cut the railway. They cut the telegraph lines. On October 16th, they shelled the town and demanded surrender. Baden-Powell refused, and then he went to work, not building real defenses, but building an illusion of them. The fake minefields. Baden-Powell ordered his men to go out in plain view of the Boer positions, and any spies watching from inside the town, and carefully bury objects in the ground around the perimeter. They planted them in neat, deliberate patterns, with all the seriousness of an engineering crew laying real explosives. They marked the locations. They posted warning signs. None of it was real. The mines were boxes of sand, random junk from around town. But the Boers didn't know that. And suddenly, approaching Mafeking on foot looked a lot more dangerous. The invisible barbed wire. This might be the most brilliant part. Baden-Powell instructed every single one of his soldiers that when they moved between trenches, they had to visibly step over and duck under obstacles, as if navigating through thick lines of barbed wire. There was no barbed wire, not a single strand. But from a distance, through binoculars, what the Boers saw was a garrison that had clearly fortified every inch of its position with deadly wire entanglements. Soldiers carefully lifting their legs, ducking low, holding the wire up for each other. It was pure theater, and it was incredibly effective. The biscuit tin searchlight. At night, a bright beam of light would sweep across the perimeter, scanning for any Boer movement. A proper military searchlight would have been an expensive, heavy piece of equipment. Baden-Powell's version was an acetylene lamp pointed into a polished biscuit tin. The tin acted as a crude reflector, throwing a surprisingly convincing beam of light across the darkness. His men moved it around the perimeter each night, making it seem like the town had multiple searchlights covering every approach. The roaming artillery. The garrison had very few guns. So Baden-Powell had them moved constantly, from one emplacement to another, fired from different positions at different times of day. To the Boers, it sounded and looked like the British had artillery all over the perimeter. His men even built a homemade howitzer in the town's railway workshop using scrap parts and a drain pipe. And here's the detail that turns this from a clever trick into genuine genius. Baden-Powell also kept morale up inside the town by organizing cricket matches on Sundays. When the Boer commander General Snyman threatened to fire on the players, Baden-Powell eventually talked him into allowing the games. He even invited the Boers to play, replying that he'd have to finish his current match first. The score was 200 days, not out. The siege lasted 217 days. Baden-Powell's force of undertrained volunteers held off an army more than 5 times their size. When British reinforcements finally arrived in May 1900, the celebrations in Britain were so intense that a new word entered the English language, Mafeking, meaning wild, uncontrollable rejoicing. All of it, achieved largely through deception. Now let's go back even further, about 1,700 years, to ancient China during the Three Kingdoms period. And we're going to meet a man whose reputation was so terrifying that he once defeated an entire army by doing absolutely nothing. His name was Zhuge Liang, and he was the chancellor and chief strategist of the Shu Han Kingdom. His nicknames were the Sleeping Dragon and the Crouching Dragon, names that told you everything about how his enemies saw him: quiet, patient, and lethally calculating. In 228 AD, Zhuge Liang was leading a northern military campaign against the rival state of Chao Wei. But after a devastating defeat at the Battle of Jiding, his main army was scattered. And Zhuge Liang found himself in the worst possible position, stranded in the small fortress city of Xicheng with roughly 2,500 soldiers. Marching toward him was General Sima Yi, one of the most capable military commanders in Chinese history, at the head of 150,000 troops. There was no time to retreat, no reinforcements anywhere close. And 2,500 men against 150,000 is not a fight. It's a massacre. So Zhuge Liang did something that everyone around him thought was insane. He ordered all 4 city gates thrown wide open. He told his soldiers to take off their armor, dress as civilians, and go sweep the streets. Then he climbed to the viewing platform above the main gate, sat down with 2 young attendants beside him, and started playing his guqin, a traditional stringed instrument. That's what Sima Yi saw when his massive army arrived at the gates of Xicheng, an open city, civilians sweeping, and the most dangerous strategist in China sitting in plain view, calmly playing music. Sima Yi stopped. His son urged him to attack. The city was obviously empty. But Sima Yi had spent years studying Zhuge Liang. He knew this man never took risks. He knew that every move Zhuge Liang made had layers of strategy beneath it. And that was exactly what Zhuge Liang was counting on. Sima Yi concluded this had to be an elaborate trap. There must be tens of thousands of soldiers hidden inside, waiting to spring an ambush. He ordered a full retreat. After the Wei army withdrew, Zhuge Liang reportedly told his officers that the strategy was extremely dangerous. It only worked because he had spent years building a reputation as someone who never gambled, never acted carelessly, never exposed himself without reason. When he suddenly did the opposite of everything his enemy expected, it short-circuited Sima Yi's ability to think clearly. Now, historians debate whether this event actually happened as described. The story comes primarily from the novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which dramatized real events. But the principle behind it was very real, and similar tactics were used throughout Chinese and Japanese military history. The lesson is unforgettable. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is not what you have. It's what your enemy thinks you have. And now we arrive at the biggest military deception in human history. One that didn't just fool a garrison or a single general. It fooled Adolf Hitler, the entire German high command, and arguably changed the outcome of World War II. It was called Operation Fortitude, and it created an entire army that didn't exist. By late 1943, the Allies were planning the invasion of Normandy, the massive D-Day assault that would open the Western Front against Nazi Germany. But they faced a terrifying problem. The Germans knew an invasion was coming. They just didn't know where. And if the Germans correctly guessed that the landing would be at Normandy, they could concentrate all their forces there and throw the Allies back into the sea. General Montgomery knew he had about 37 divisions. The Germans had around 60. If both armies showed up at the same beach, the math was devastating. So the Allies decided to do something extraordinary: make Hitler believe the real invasion was going to hit somewhere else entirely. Specifically, the Pas de Calais, the shortest crossing point of the English Channel, the Ghost Army. Under the codename Operation Quicksilver, the Allies created the first United States Army group, FUSAG. On paper, it was a massive invasion force stationed in southeast England, pointing directly at Calais. In reality, it was a Hollywood production. Inflatable rubber tanks were deployed across fields in Kent and Essex. From the air, and German reconnaissance planes were deliberately allowed to photograph them. They looked identical to real Sherman tanks. Hundreds of dummy landing craft were moored in harbors along the southeast coast, built from scaffolding, canvas, and empty fuel barrels. Fake military buildings, fake airfields, fake supply depots, all constructed to tell one story. A massive army is massing here, and it's about to cross the channel. The commander. Every fake army needs a real leader. The Allies chose General George S. Patton, the single commander the Germans feared and respected most. Patton was photographed touring the fake FUSAG camps. Intelligence reports placed him at the head of this phantom force. And the Germans bought it completely. Who else would lead the main invasion but the best general the Americans had? The double agents. But rubber tanks and dummy boats weren't the real weapon. The most effective tool was human intelligence, specifically, a network of double agents controlled by British MI5 under something called the double-cross system. The most important of these agents was a Spanish man named Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo. Garbo had actually volunteered to spy for the Allies, then convinced the Germans he was working for them. He invented an entire network of fictional sub-agents who were supposedly feeding him intelligence from across Britain. Through Garbo and other double agents, the Allies fed the Germans a steady stream of perfectly calibrated false information. Troop movements that confirmed FUSAG's existence. Detailed reports on Patton's preparations. Timetables that suggested the Calais attack would come weeks after any diversionary operation. The Germans were so impressed with Garbo's intelligence that they awarded him the Iron Cross, a German military honor, for his service. He is believed to be the only person in history to receive both the Iron Cross from Germany and an MBE from Britain for the same work. The radio game. On top of all this, the Allies generated massive amounts of fake radio traffic, mimicking the communications patterns of real military divisions. Radio operators in southeast England sent and received scripted messages around the clock, creating the electronic fingerprint of an army that existed only on the airwaves. Meanwhile, the Allies had cracked the German Enigma code, so they could monitor in real time exactly what the Germans believed and adjust the deception accordingly. It was like playing poker when you can see every card in your opponent's hand. The result? On June 6, 1944, D-Day, 160,000 Allied soldiers landed on the beaches of Normandy, and Hitler didn't send reinforcements. Even as the battle raged on the Normandy beaches, the German High Command remained convinced that this was a diversionary attack. The real invasion, Patton's invasion, was still coming at Calais. Hitler kept his powerful panzer divisions in reserve, waiting for a second landing that would never come. The Allies had hoped the deception would buy them 2 weeks. It bought them 7. For nearly 2 months after D-Day, significant German forces sat idle at Pas de Calais, waiting for a ghost army that existed only in their imagination. By the time the Germans realized the truth, the Allies had established an unbreakable foothold in France. The liberation of Europe had begun. 3 different eras, 3 different continents, 3 commanders who faced overwhelming odds and had almost nothing to fight with. And all 3 won. Not with weapons, but with psychology. What connects Baden-Powell's biscuit tin searchlight, Zhuge Liang's open gates, and Patton's rubber tanks is a single insight. In war, your enemy doesn't fight you. They fight their idea of you. And if you can control that idea, if you can shape what they believe about your strength, your intentions, your next move, then you don't need weapons at all. The Boers at Mafeking fought a fortress that didn't exist. Sima Yi retreated from an army that was never there, and Hitler waited for an invasion that was made of rubber and radio static. Every one of these deceptions exploited the same human weakness. We trust what we see. We trust what we expect. And we almost never stop to ask, what if everything I'm looking at is a lie? If you found this fascinating, drop a like and subscribe, because the history of warfare is full of stories that sound too wild to be real. And the next one might be even crazier.